Hello and welcome to another lesson from Level Up Mathematics. Today's lesson, we will be learning to write equations of quadratic functions in vertex form and factored form, also known as intercept form. But before we do, let's review the three different forms of quadratic functions. So we can write quadratic functions in different forms. We can write them in vertex form, which is y equals a times x minus h parentheses squared plus k. We can write them in factored form, sometimes called intercept form, by using the formula y equals a times x minus p times x minus q. Or we can write quadratic functions in standard form, y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Now, in example 1, let's look at an example of these three different forms in action. So it says, using the given information, write the equation in each form. So our given information is, we know the vertex is 1 comma negative 27. So I'm going to put a h and a k above the 1, negative 27, because that's our vertex. And we use the variables h and k to describe the vertex of parabolas. We also know that the zeros are 4 and negative 2. So I'm going to say that p is 4 and q equals negative 2. That's our zeros. And the other thing we know is that our a value is 3, our b value is negative 6, and our c value is negative 24. So to write our function in vertex form using this formula right here, we're going to need the value of a, which is 3. Then we need our h value, and that is 1, so x minus 1 parentheses squared, and then our k value, which is minus 27. So here's how we could write our function in vertex form. Now let's just graph that function. 3 parentheses x minus 1 parentheses squared minus 27. So let me zoom out a little bit so you can see what that function looks like. Okay. All right. In factored form, oh, and by the way, let's click on the vertex so you can indeed see that the vertex is 1, negative 27. All right. In factored form, all we need to know is the value of a, the value of p, and the value of q. So we'd say y equals, our a value is 3. Our first 0 is 4, so x minus 4. Our second 0 is negative 2, so x minus negative 2. But you never want to leave double signs in your parentheses, so let's rewrite this as y equals 3, parenthesis, x minus 4, x plus 2. And then let's look at the sketch of that graph. 3, parenthesis, x minus 4, parenthesis, x plus 2, close parentheses. And notice that it landed right on top of our original function. That's because this is just a different way of writing an equation for the same parabola. Let me just show you. Here is your vertex, your 0 at negative 2. And here's your 0 at positive 4. Down there, our vertex is 1, negative 27. Now, our last problem, or our last question wants us to write it in standard form. So in standard form, all we need to know is the value of a, b, and c, which they gave us. So y equals, our a value was 3, so 3x squared. Our b value is negative 6, so negative 6x. And our c value was negative 24, so negative 24. Now, let's just graph standard form. If we wrote the equation right, this parabola should be equivalent to the other two parabolas we graphed. So 3x squared minus 6x minus 24. And sure enough, it is equivalent. And we can see Here we can see the y-intercept is the only really thing that we notice on a parabola written in standard form, 0, -24. It's the only thing that stands out to us from the equation. So I can go ahead and say, here's my vertex, here are my zeros. So there's our critical attributes of that function. All right. Now, in example 2, it says, use the information in the graph below to write a quadratic function in factored or intercept form. So first of all, let's write the equation for intercept form. It's y equals a times x minus p times x minus q, where p and q are the zeros of the function. So I already know what the zeros of this function are. This can be p, and this can be q. So I've got the zeros. So I know my equation is going to look something like this. I don't know what a is, so I'll just put a blank there. And then I know that my zeros are x plus 5 and x minus 1. All I need to do is figure out what is that value of a. Now, to figure out the value of a, we're going to use the given information. So we have an additional point here, 0, -10. I'm going to put an x above the 0 and a y above the -10. So what we're going to do now is we're going to plug in these values into our equation, y equals a times x minus p, x minus q. So for the y, I'm going to plug in this y value, -10. For the a, we do not know a, so I'll just leave it right there. For x, I'm going to plug in this x value, 0. So 0 minus p, which is -5. And then x minus q, we know x is 0, minus q, which is 1. Now I'm going to simplify this. -10 equals a times 0 minus -5 is the same thing as 0 plus 5. So this would become 5. And 0 minus 1 is -1. So I'll simplify this again. -10, excuse me. -10 is equal to 5 times -1 is -5a. And then I'll just divide both sides by -5 to find the value of a. So divide by -5, divide by -5. So the value of a would be +2. So now I know the value of a here is 2. So my equation is y equals 2, parenthesis, x plus 5, parenthesis, x minus 1. Final answer, written in standard form. Now, let's graph it and see if it matches the original graph we were given. So 2, parenthesis, x plus 5, close parenthesis, open parenthesis, x minus 1, close parenthesis. All right, so, yep, we have a point at 0, -10. Let's check our zeros. -5, 0, that is correct. And 1, 0, that is correct. So we know we have the answer correct. All right, example 2. Use the information in the graph below to write a quadratic function in vertex form. So it's always important that you know what form they want the answer to be given in. So vertex form looks like this. Y equals a times x minus h, parentheses squared, plus k. Now, in this problem, I know what h and k are. So I'm going to put a h under the -4 and a k under the -6. This 0, 2 is a random point on the graph, so I'll put an x above it and a y above the 2. So I know my answer is going to look like this. Y equals something, don't know the value of a, parenthesis, x plus 4, parenthesis squared, plus k. In this example, k is -6. So minus 6. All we have to do is figure out, what is the value of a? What is the value of a? So to do that, I'm going to plug in our values that we've been given. So for the y, I'm going to plug in the y value we were given, which is 2. I do not know the a value, so I'll just write down a. For the x, I'm going to plug in the x value we're given, which is 0. So 0 minus our h value, which is -4, parentheses squared, plus our k value, which is -6. Now, I'm going to simplify this up a little bit. 2 is equal to a times 0 minus -4 is the same thing as 0 plus 4 squared. So 0 plus 4 is 4, and 4 squared is 16. So this is a 16, plus -6 is the same thing as -6. Now I'm going to simplify it a little bit more. So 2 is equal to 16a minus 6. And now I just want to solve for a. So I'm going to add 6 to both sides. So that would be 8 equals 16a. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 16 to find the value of a. Now be careful when you divide by 16, because the value of a is not 2. 8 divided by 16 is going to give you 1/2, or 0.5. So now I know the value of a is 1/2. Now let me write that answer a little bit neater. Y equals 1/2, parenthesis, x plus 4, parenthesis squared, minus 6. Now I always like to check my answer, so I'm going to check it by graphing. So 0.5, parenthesis, x plus 4, parenthesis squared, minus 6. And then I just want to check my graph to make, so check the vertex. It is -4, 6. And then check 0, 2. Yes, 0, 2 is on the graph. So I know I have my answer correct. All right, example 4. For quadratic function f, f of -1 equals 0, f of 2 equals 9, and f of 4 is equal to 0. Write an equation in intercept or factored form. Intercept or factored form. So intercept form looks like this. Y equals a times x minus p times x minus q. Now, here's what we know. If f of -1 equals 0, that means we have a point on this parabola at -1, 0. So our p value, for our first 0 of the function p, is -1. We also know we have a point at 2, 9. Now that is not a 0 of the function, so I'm just going to put an x and a y above it. And we know that f of 4 is 0. So we have a point at 4, 0. So 4 must be q. All right. All right, let's plug in what we know here. For the y, I'm going to plug in the y value, which is 9. We do not know a. For the x, I'm going to plug in the x value, which is 2. For the p, I'm going to plug in -1. And for x, I will plug in a 2. And for q, I will plug in a 4. Now we're just going to evaluate this formula. So 9 is equal to a, parenthesis, parenthesis. So in my first parenthesis, 2 minus -1, that would be 3. My second parenthesis, 2 minus 4 is -2. Now let's simplify that a little bit. 9 equals 3 times -2. That would be -6a. Now let's solve for a by dividing both sides by -6. So we know -3 over 2 is equal to a. Now that we have the value of a, we can write our equation in intercept or factored form. So y equals -3 over 2, parenthesis, x plus 1, parenthesis, x minus 4. Now let's check our answer by graphing it. Here we have -3 over 2, parenthesis, x plus 1, parenthesis, x minus 4, close parenthesis. All right, now let's check. We want to check our zeros. The first one is at -1, check. The second point is at 4, check. And let's check what our value, let's bring up a table. We can delete that. And we can see that when the x value is 2, let's see, 1, 2, the y value is 9. So that checks out also. All right, last example. A quadratic function has a vertex of -10, 5. So I'm going to write that down. It told me it was the vertex. So that means I know h and I know k. The quadratic function also passes through the point -12, comma, -15. Now, this point is not the vertex, so I can label it with an x and a y. Write a function in vertex form to describe this function. So, let's write down vertex form first. Y equals a times x minus h, parentheses squared, plus k. Now we'll begin to plug in all of our given information. We know the value of y is -15. We do not know the value of a. We know the value of x is -12. We know the value of h is -10. And then we know the value of k is 5. So plus 5. Ooh, I left off one important part of the equation, because without that little square, you're not going to be able to form a parabola. So make sure you don't leave off little bits of the equation or you'll get it wrong like I almost just did. All right, so now let's simplify this a little bit. -15 is equal to a, parenthesis. Now, -12 minus -10 is the same thing as -12 plus 10, which would be -2. And -2 squared is +4. Plus 5. All right, let's simplify this a little bit more so it makes it easier to solve. A times 4 is 4a plus 5. All right, now let's solve for the value of a. So I will subtract 5 from both sides. So -15 minus 5 gives me -20. On the right side, I would be left with 4a. Now divide both sides by 4 to solve for a. So that would be -5 equals a. All right, now that I know the value of a, I'm ready to write my equation. Y equals -5, parenthesis, x, the value of h was -10, so plus 10 squared, plus k. The value of k was 5. Now, again, we're going to check our answer with a graph. So -5, parenthesis, x plus 10, parenthesis squared, plus 5. All right, we want to check our vertex to make sure it's at negative 10, 5, and it is. And we also want to see, is there a point on the graph of negative 12, comma 15? So I'm going to press the gear button and bring up the table. Down here, I'll type in negative 12. And sure enough, negative 15 is there. So our given information was all there, so that means we have the correct answer. And that concludes today's lesson on writing quadratic functions in vertex and intercept form.